All right, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm so glad that you're here. Um, Today we're going to be talking about teaching emotion regulation through play. I have been talking a lot about play lately. I'm really excited to talk about this today in terms of emotion regulation because it is one of my favorite things to discuss when it comes to child development, the way that kids can really regulate themselves, really engage with their families and their communities is super important. And so I'm glad that you're here with me today. I am a BCBA. I have my master's in education, special education. I specialize in autism and neurodiversity. This started with a family member of mine many years ago. And I've been working with the neurodiverse community for about 20 years. I'm currently a consultant. I'm also a research fellow here at the Yale Child Study Center, and I'm a content editor and externship co-coordinator for the Association for Science and Autism Treatment. So you can also find more about my interests and a little bit more about me at my website, marciaquestel.com. Thanks again for joining me today. All right, so we are really excited about Spark here in my group. We are really thrilled to be a part of Spark. It's the largest autism research consortium, the largest research program for autism ever conducted, and it is nationwide. Yale is a site that is helping to support people throughout New England. So if you or someone you know has autism, has an autism diagnosis, we would be thrilled to talk to you about Spark. And you can contact my team at sparkforautism@yale.edu, or you can call us at 203-785-7539. And that number is actually on the phone on my desk. So you're not going to be sent to some central line somewhere. That's actually my office phone line. So you can call me there and reach me anytime to talk about Spark. Also, we are super pumped about Casey Sparks. Casey is the Cultural Autism Studies at Yale, and we are working with autistic anthropologist Dr. Dawn Prince Hughes, and she is leading the way in identifying and doing an ethnography about autistic culture. So if you are interested in the autism community, autistic culture, neurodiversity, we welcome you to join us at Meetup for our Casey Talks. And also you can find Casey on Facebook, YouTube, TikTok, you name it, all the socials. And if you have any other questions about Casey, please reach out. Autistic culture is something that we are really, really proud of, and we're really excited to be and honored to be a part of that. ASAT, I always talk about because it's a really trusted resource for scientific information about autism and its treatment options. So if you want to find information that really is backed by scientific evidence, you can check out asatonline.org. So for today's objectives, we're going to review issues surrounding play. We're going to talk about the right to play, time and priority, skill acquisition, interest variation, motivation, and reinforcement. We will outline the need and the value of teaching emotion regulation in natural settings. And we'll illustrate how to weave emotion regulation goals into play strategies. The first one we're going to talk about briefly. I'm going to show several slides about that, but we have been covering some of this in my previous talks. So again, I can send you the slides anytime for those talks. I am more than happy to meet with you privately to talk about those things. And also, we will have the recordings available soon. They're just currently being edited, but they will be available on YouTube, and I can send you the links as soon as the previous recordings are ready. And we take some deep dives in teaching play, the right to play, those things, but we are going to sort of go over, describe, and review issues surrounding play today. So let's get started with that. I love this quote. The idea that the poor should have leisure has always been shocking to the rich. I'm really thoughtful about that quote because I think that it is something that still very much exists today. I think that people who are um, really privileged and really wealthy sometimes don't fully understand the need for people who don't have the same means as them to take time to relax, to enjoy leisure, to play and, quote unquote, waste their time. We live in a very high stakes, high stress society. And I think that some systems that are in place today, also fueled by social media and the comparison problem, people really like to fill their time with a lot of activity that is, super productive or something that they can show people that they're accomplishing. And a lot of people are workaholics, a lot of people are work hard, play hard. But I think that we need to remember that leisure and downtime are really important for our health as individuals and our health as society. And I also think about how this translates to ableism. We talk a lot in the neurodiverse community about ableism and how people sometimes talk about neurodiversity through a lens that they should be accomplishing like what neurotypical people are accomplishing. They should be doing or behaving in the way that neurotypical people are behaving. And so I really want to just take a second to think about that before we go into our next topic, because if we're thinking about neurodiverse people as people who are in need of so much intervention and therapy, then their downtime may appear like idle or like wasted time. And I really want to challenge that because people who have, different diagnoses, people who identify as neurodiverse, really have the same rights and the same needs to have downtime, leisure, and play as everybody else. And I really think that a lot of, especially children with diagnoses, are sort of hustled through special education and therapies and really strict routines. And it can be a lot to impose on their time that their childhood is spent in this really sort of super productive way. And so I really just want to put that out there, give you something to think about, and just remember that leisure and downtime are really a value that need to be held and prioritized. So how do we play? We think about like video games. Some adults play video games, some don't. Some like to do quiet games like puzzles or word crosses or word searches. Some like traditional games like chess and checkers and Scrabble. Some people like to go out and play games like pool. People play horseshoe at parties, horseshoes or darts or things like that. Folks like to go hiking, to go exploring. They like to ride a bike, go cycling. And more often than not, lots of people are on their phones, right? So people can play these games like Words with Friends or Candy Crush or whatever the new things are on their phones. And to think that like play is only something for children is not really accurate because everybody plays in their own way. Everybody has downtime and leisure and things that they do that are like nonsense or for no reason all the time. And so just think about that. Think about the ways that you play. All right, it's time for our first poll. So I'm going to pull that up. This one's going to be pretty easy. This one is Um, in what ways do you like to have fun with your kids? It's just something to think about. I have a cute picture here of one of the kids that I work with. We're going to see a picture of him later. He's been a person that I've been with for about 10 years. and he is obsessed with music and instruments and rainbows and is incredibly gifted. Um, he has perfect pitch, he's very self-taught, and he can play a range of instruments. So go ahead and think about what ways you prefer to have fun with kids. Great, got some nice participation coming in. Thank you all so much. Wonderful, nice range, really big range of ways that we like to have fun. Everything from watching TV and, or movies or videos, playing video games, playing outside, shopping, sports activities, hobbies. Almost everyone who has been engaging with the poll so far does like board games and card games. That's awesome. Reading, playing or listening to music, pretend play, silliness, rough and tumble. That's a lower response there so far. Building things like Lego, blocks, arts and crafts is a nice high one. Walking or hiking, going for drives, cooking or baking. I'm going to give about 12 more seconds, so get your responses in. Okay, awesome. All right, gonna end it there. So yeah, you can see there's just like a really nice range of results here. I think the highest choices we got were playing outside and board games and arts and crafts, board games and cards and arts and crafts. Awesome. Okay, great. Thanks for participating. Okay, so we're gonna move on. I want to talk about the right to play. I did a whole talk on children's right that play is a human right. But in the Convention on the Rights of the Child, UNICEF describes that states parties recognize the right of the child to rest and leisure, to engage in play and recreational activities appropriate to the age of the child, and to participate freely in cultural life and the arts. States parties shall respect and promote the right of the child to participate fully in cultural and artistic life, and shall encourage the provision of appropriate and equal opportunities for cultural, artistic, recreational, and leisure activity. So just recognizing that play for a child is recognized around the world as a human right. And so we really want to be mindful of that and consider ways that we can improve the opportunities and access for children to play in meaningful ways. I want to talk about play and the definition that I consider as play. Play is a state of mind that one has when absorbed in an activity that provides enjoyment and a suspension of sense of time. So it's really absorbing and engaging. Play is self-motivated, so you want to do it again and again. I'm not going to read all of this, but it's positively valued by the player. It serves no other objectives. In utilitarian terms, it's inherently unproductive. It's not obligatory, it's freely chosen by the player, right? And so it's actively engaging and has certain systematic relations to what is not play. So although it's not productive, in terms of like for a end goal that is specific or meaningful, or has some sort of utility, it is a form of practice and has some relations to what is not play. So think about that, because when we think of play, sometimes we think like, oh, kids are always playing around. But a lot of their time is not spent actually playing in this sort of meaningful way. They might be playing a sport, they might be playing um, a game in gym, but it's not freely chosen by them each time they're doing it. They're usually obligated to do those types of things. They're brought there, they're told they have to. They're doing it for an objective, like to get better at something. They're really, sort of trying to do it because they have an obligation to their team or to their teacher. So just keep that in mind. Children, according to the AAP, children need to develop a variety of skill sets. to optimize their development and manage toxic stress. Research demonstrates that developmentally appropriate play with the parents and peers is a singular opportunity to promote the social, emotional, cognitive, language, and self regulation skills that build executive function and a pro social brain. Okay, so this is from your doctors, in the United States, agreed upon by them that play is super, super important. It's not frivolous. It enhances brain structure and function and promotes executive function. Okay, it involves so many skills and promotes so many skills. So, but there's a lot of issues related to implementing more play opportunity, like time and priorities and skill acquisition. So, like, if I wanted to have my neurodiverse child engage in more play, or to teach them more types of play, I might say, do I even have time for this? Can I make this a priority amidst everything else we go or have going on? How do I increase their skill? How do I, you know, start somewhere to what type of play should I choose? Or you might have some interest variation that the child doesn't seem interested in what you think they could or should be playing with, or their interests vary so often, they can't maintain interest in an activity that you'd like for them to do. And also, how do they stay motivated? And how do you increase like reinforcement? How do you make it so that this is something they want to do again and again? So that's going to be our next poll, is asking about that. I'd really like to see what all of you think. And let me go launch that poll for you now. So this one is called Biggest Hurdle. What is the biggest hurdle that you experience when considering how to increase opportunities to teach play skills or emotion regulation skills at home? And just like before, I'm going to give you about a minute or two to think about this. They're ranging from most difficult, very difficult, somewhat difficult, to not difficult at all. The choices are finding or making time for something new in our schedule, knowing where to start, what skills to focus on first, how much to focus on as opposed to others, figuring out what my child will be interested in and how to keep their attention, finding the motivation and reinforcement strategy to keep us all consistent and on track. All right, so we can see that there's a range of answers, but that something that's most difficult or very difficult is finding the motivation and the reinforcement strategy, that's for sure. Also, knowing where to start seems to be very difficult for most of our respondents. So, yeah, I definitely hear that. I definitely see that. Um, I think that all of these things can be difficult for sure. And we have to understand those difficulties and identify them when we're thinking about how we can move forward. So for more information about these issues, I did put up here a slide about my previous talks. How to structure days at home for success and fun was in June. Play as a human right was in July. And last month in August, we did helping siblings play together. And upcoming in November, we're doing teaching tolerance and helping behaviors through play. And January 9th is actually the final talk in this 10-part series, Structuring Playdates for Success. So my email is there, MQ for Marcia Questel, mq89@yale.edu. And I can definitely send you some slides. I'll get you the recordings when they're available. And also, we can always discuss any of these topics. And again, I'm open to meeting with you privately if you'd like to discuss something at any time. So let's move on to the need and the value of teaching emotion regulation in natural settings. So you cannot talk about emotion regulation without talking about Dr. James Gross. I had the honor and privilege of meeting Dr. Gross just in the last academic year. He did a semester here at Yale, but he typically is at Stanford. Um, what then is emotion regulation? He wrote, emotion regulation refers to the processes by which individuals influence which emotions they have, when they have them, and how they experience and express these emotions. Dr. Gross is by far one of the most influential researchers in emotion regulation, has an ever-growing body of work spanning several decades. So if you want to learn more about emotion regulation, I highly recommend that you look into Dr. James Gross's work. He has over 600 publications, which is insane, which have been cited more than 200,000 times. Really seriously, he is what many of us consider to be sort of the forefather or the grandfather of research around emotion regulation. So definitely give his work a look. And so what does it really mean? Recently in 2017, in the general developmental literature, the term emotion regulation refers to the range of cognitive, physiological, and behavioral abilities that allow an individual to monitor and modulate the occurrence, valence, intensity, and expression of one's emotion and arousal. So let's break that up a little bit. Cognitive meaning the way that you're thinking about it, physiologically is the way you feel in your body, and behavioral is what you actually do in action. And that those different abilities, cognitive, physiological, and behavioral, allow you to monitor, so like think about and control or modulate what emotions actually occur, the valence, meaning between like positive and negative, the intensity, like the high level of it, and how you express it. So that's sort of, I think, a really nice detailed way to think about the different components of emotion regulation. And successfully regulating one's emotions theoretically requires a child to be able to recognize those emotional states at age appropriate levels. Age appropriate, when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking of it as really determined by the individual. I think that a lot of work is sort of reliant on these normative values around age, and in the neurodiversity paradigm, we don't really think about age in that same way. So I do want you to just take that with a grain of salt, but basically to recognize their own emotional states, to access strategies to self-soothe or relax when experiencing negative emotions or strong levels of excitement or arousal, and maintaining progress in current activities in the face of potentially interfering emotions. So, if you were in the middle of an intense work demand or a social event and you had this distracting, say, text message or email came in to your phone that gave you some strong feelings, how would you recognize how you feel? How would you relax yourself about that? How would you sort of manage your arousal physiologically and still engage in the current sort of work or social demand that you had in front of you in real time? I also like to talk about interpersonal emotion regulation because that has to do with how we regulate each other. So I did some work with Dr. Yorman and Dr. Gadasi Polak and our colleagues over the past year about how parents and teens specifically modulate each other, because this is not only a didactic sort of one-way route when we're talking about emotion regulation. Parents don't just regulate their kids also regulate parents. And there is that sort of cyclical snowballing effect that can happen when one person is dysregulated and the other person is dysregulated, whoever comes first. And also in our work, we found that cognitive inflexibility, sort of that rigid thinking, is implied as a contributor to emotion dysregulation. And we, of course, when we're talking about neurodiversity and autism and other diagnoses, we have to talk about masking. Okay, so it is a term that's used by the autistic community to describe the suppression of aspects of self and identity to fly under the radar or quote appear normal using conscious or unconscious means. Conscious being like mimicking someone else's facial expressions, or unconsciously, like unintentionally suppressing aspects of one's identity. Masking is a really important topic to neurodiverse people. It is sometimes really imposed on them by people in their community, people in their family, people in society, and it is sometimes self imposed. in terms of ways to um, sort of exist in this neurotypical society and try to survive and to not feel as though you're drawing attention to yourself or or that you're like hiding something so that you're more acceptable. And it can be really troubling. Many in our talks in the autistic culture group, in the Casey group, talk about masking being really troubling, and others talk about it as being a really important skill that they have, that it's really helpful. And I think that we can think about that in other terms. I think that neurotypical people do this a lot. I think that people with other diagnoses like anxiety, OCD, depression, bipolar also do this. But it is particularly of importance to the neurodiverse community, and so I really wanted to talk about that for a moment as well. So a critical understanding that I would also like for everyone to understand is that dysregulation is stable and related to social and behavioral functioning, but is largely independent of IQ. So these findings really suggest that it's not just those who are quote unquote high functioning or that have a high IQ or high sort of ability in terms of their, let's say, learning abilities or vocal speech abilities. IQ is really independent of that. And so we see people become emotionally dysregulated who have a very high IQ. We have people who are very emotionally regulated who have a very low IQ. I have some information in one of my previous talks about IQ because it's a really normative thing to consider as it is. And so again, we take that with a grain of salt. But really, IQ has nothing to do with it. So in contrast to the relationships with social and behavioral functioning, ratings of emotion regulation in this finding were unrelated to cognitive or language abilities. This is significant in the study as 88% of the children had IQ scores in the typical range, suggesting that high levels of cognitive abilities may not be a protective factor for children with autism against emotion regulation difficulties. Okay, so again, IQ really doesn't have too much to do with it. But here's where I write bingo, because research shows that many interventions for children with autism focus on addressing behaviors through, systematic behavior management like ABA, positive behavior supports, reinforcement for alternative behaviors, and teach social skills through modeling and repetition. And even interventions focused on social emotional development have largely involved teaching children about emotions via tasks that are isolated from the complexities of the social environment. So, most importantly, these are removed from the child's own emotional experiences. And this is why we're talking about this today. Because when you talk about teaching neurodiverse children about emotion regulation, one of the first things you'll find in a Google search is emotions flashcards. And people buy those flashcards and then they go through some teaching of like, this is what sad looks like, this is what angry looks like. And it's so surface level and so just vocabulary building that it doesn't really have a lot of meaning in the terms of like how the child can use this information in their real life when they're really experiencing emotions. And also, it doesn't address the fact that a lot of us are masking. Like, if I'm internally really sad about something right now, you have no idea, right? So like, there's a lot of ways in which people experience negative emotions that don't appear, and also times when they're happy and that doesn't appear. So that sort of idea of like the difference between just teaching about emotional vocabulary and actually teaching how to emotionally regulate are very different things. So let's talk about how we can weave emotion regulation goals into play strategies. This was in my previous talk, but I really just want to drive this home. This system is in play here as well. I talked about it in terms of teaching kids to play together in my sibling talk, but seriously, this is what you need to know. Consistency is truly key. If you're going to change anything about your child's behavior, anything about their learning, anything about their understanding of emotions, you're not going to get it done in one shot. You're not going to get it right the first time. You're not going to get all of the details ready in one go. you really need to be consistent about making this a goal and something that you're addressing on a daily basis and weaving it into your lifestyle. You wanna start very small. If you are thinking of, like, a small task that you can introduce, you might wanna break that down even further, make it even smaller. Give yourself time limits, and give plenty of reinforcement to yourself and to your child. So if you do something great just by trying something new, just by introducing the idea of something new or researching something new, make sure you give yourself a time limit and say, I'm just going to look into this or I'm just going to try this for a few minutes and then be happy with yourself. Whatever you do in terms of like if you like to give yourself a check mark, if you like to cross something out, I know I love crossing things out on my to-do list. But whatever reinforcement works for you, make sure you do that and keep notes again consistently. Keeping notes, of course, as a BCBA, I like to say keeping data, but whatever works for you. If there's a way that you can write down a detailed note, or if it's better for you to create a spreadsheet and have data, whatever works for you, make sure that you have some sort of notes that you can mark your progress as you go through. Choose your playtime and your skill acquisition time wisely. As we talked about, everybody has the right to leisure and play. Choose to provide your child with the freedom to play in a way that they enjoy. Do not turn everything into a teachable moment. I know a lot of parents are focused on teachable moments and like capitalizing on everything as an opportunity to teach something. That's fine, but for a lot of folks, that will backfire. For a lot of kids, that will backfire. Even those kids who thrive on, like, highly structured, adult-led, one-to-one scenarios, you may wanna increase, for those kinda kids, time for them to work on flexibility and problem solving and taking initiative with things. If you're constantly just, like, jumping into an otherwise super free leisure moment and turning it into something, like, scholastic, then you might be robbing other natural opportunities. So be thoughtful, and I say be wise about choosing what's play time and what is skill acquisition time. For increased play, skill acquisition, actually increasing your child's ability to play without even considering the emotion regulation teaching yet, consider what your child already likes to do and build on that. If they already like to play with cars or line up cars or put the car in the garage or whatever they do with cars, think about a way that you can model. Just jump into that and engage with them and just see if you can increase some complexity in that. And again, don't just every time they play with a car, you turn it into something challenging. That would actually make it less likely that they want to play. So just slowly think about ways that you can turn something that they already like to enjoy into something a little bit bigger, a little bit more complex. Generalize it to something else. Maybe now we try it with trucks. Maybe now we try it with trains. Model that it's really fun. You should be engaged with your child at a level that they are actually enjoying your presence. Like, make it more fun, model that it's really fun. Consider sensory needs, what to avoid altogether, and what can be introduced in a stepwise manner. So if you have a child that really hates touching sticky things, I mean, like, creating slime with them is not gonna be something that you do first. But if you think that it interferes with their ability to, let's say, get involved in certain projects or do certain things, and you want them to, be able to at least tolerate some of that, think about ways that you can introduce that in a stepwise manner. But don't think like, I'm because I think this should be fun, you also think this should be fun. That's not true. It doesn't work like that. Um, there's certain activities that I enjoy, and there's certain things I absolutely want no part of, and I'm not going to change that. Right. And so we have to take those considerations in when we're talking about increasing play in ways that the child actually will enjoy. Avoid teaching the right way in the beginning. This is very hard for most adults that I work with. I do a lot of consultations with parents, I do a lot of consultations with staff, and when they open up a game box, like a brand new game, they often just wanna read all the instructions and have the kids sit there with them and just play the game the right way from the beginning, and it's like, goes terribly because the child may not have the skills to tolerate that whole new game, they may not have the attention span to wait for you to learn how to do it yourself, so definitely don't do that. If you're gonna try something new, open up the box yourself ahead of time, learn how the game is supposed to be played ahead of time on your own by yourself. And then if your child is interested or shows an interest, you can say, "Hey, like this is what this is about." And if they're saying like, "I don't feel like playing that right now," don't insist that they play it. You might start modeling with the toy, you might start modeling with the game, and if they show no interest in it, let it go, okay? Don't try to make it happen right away. Fun is key. The more fun you're having, the more fun you can display, the more fun that you can model, that's gonna be really important in getting your kid involved into the play skill. And you may just need to introduce the idea and model it many times before they show any interest. So let's say you have um, a new toy or a new activity, and you just each day take it out, start playing with it, start looking at it. Maybe you have a sibling or a spouse or an adult or a friend that can show some interest with you, and you both are laughing or enjoying it. You might just have to model this a few times for the child to have their own intrinsic interest in wanting to try it. You need to build trust over time, okay? Um, you're introducing something new, and when you're bringing something to the table, you want the child to trust you that it's something enjoyable, that you're not gonna force them to do it, you're not gonna insist, you're not gonna punish them if they don't do it the right way. And they can choose to try it or not, take it or leave it, and then if they choose to try it, they can back out anytime, it's not gonna last forever, it's not gonna be dragged out. Okay, so if you're starting to increase play skills with your child, or you're trying to introduce some new things, some new scenarios, some new games, make sure you keep all of that in mind, because the worst thing that happens is a child isn't, like, isn't acquiring a ton of play skills. Let's say that they're always on screens or video games, or they're always involved by themselves and they don't show any interest in playing with anyone else in the house. And the parent really wants to engage with them and have them, build a relationship and build some play skills. And they just like force this play stuff to happen, or they make it really unfun. So you need to build trust over time. If it's new for you, make sure you do that. Once you have a handful of short games or activities going, you can begin thinking of the emotion regulation goals, and these will be different for every child. Think of what your child is already good at and what they have difficulty with. You might want to take some notes about that. Don't attempt to address the very difficult things first, and remember that this is a new skill for you too, right? So give yourself some grace. Consider some emotion regulation ideas that occur in play and they occur in real life. Patience, taking turns with a single item, losing, coping with or responding to other people sharing their feelings, persistence through difficulty, resilience, not doing it right, congratulating others, like saying good game, responding to other people losing, like better luck next time, sharing sets of materials and waiting, and more. Okay, there's a lot of these emotion regulation goals that are built into play. They're naturally occurring all the time, and that's why sometimes trying something new can be really difficult. So think about what your child is good at, think about something that they have to work on, and really address this in a very stepwise manner. It can be taught in many ways. In modeling, you can talk about like a story like Johnny, who is a boy who lost his kite in the wind, or at work, my friend got so frustrated by my other coworker, Or I heard that your friend Sarah had a hard time when recess was over, just talking about emotions and bringing emotion vocabulary and regulation into discussion. Playing with a third party, like another adult or another child who is mature enough to model what you're expecting, or a character. You can bring in a spouse or a friend and tell them you want them to model something like bumping their elbow and being like, ouch, right? And then you model helping and asking if they're okay. That sounds really simple, but for some kids, that's really, really difficult. They see somebody else hurt, they get really overwhelmed by that. And you can just introduce it in a very quick 5-second way. Ask a sibling or a cousin to get frustrated, let's say during Play-Doh, and thinking like, oh, I just can't get it right. And then they're breathing and they try it again. And then they either get it right and they celebrate if your kid is working on just that regulation piece, or the flexibility piece, like making something new. You can play with stuffed animals or toys. Like I have a child that I work with that had trouble waiting. So if you're playing with stuffed animals and one gets lagged behind and the other one has to wait, they can say something like, oh, like, come on, or this is really hard, or I'm frustrated. And just that little few seconds that are interrupted in your play scenario might be enough for the child to see that happen and have it modeled for them how to handle it, and that it ends, right? That's the kind of stuff that you want to start weaving into the play scenarios. Pretending with yourself, you're taking on these actions or roles, and then pretending with the child. That is the most complex of all of these, is asking the child to pretend one of these scenarios. If they are able to pretend, make sure it resolves very quickly at first. Okay, so if they're able to pretend something that is otherwise in real life very difficult, like I had a child who really struggled with other people expressing their emotions or their pain. So if somebody said, "Oh my gosh, my stomach hurts," he would get really upset and say, "Oh my gosh, my stomach hurts," and he would, like, take it on himself. He would want them to go away. That sort of really strong empathic response was, like, very overwhelming. So when we started getting into this place where I had some third parties do some things and he was able to watch those things resolve and he didn't have to engage, that was really helpful. Then I would do some pretending, and then we finally had him do some pretending. And it gave him that whole physiological experience, that whole real life experience, but understanding that it's play, it's controlled, we can stop anytime, we don't have to do this, and that we are pretending, it's not real. You always want to say, let's pretend, or do you want to pretend? And again, if they don't want to, don't do it. This is a child that I worked with who really struggled with not knowing. And so we had games with all of his stuffies. And in this game, it's particularly difficult because the answer is literally on your face, right? So the thing that you're supposed to be learning about, everyone else knows but you. So it's a very challenging game. Um, and so when you play with a range of characters, it kind of gives you more personalities to contrive besides yourself and the child. And so that gives you like a lot of diverse outcomes to work with. Final notes, be patient, take some kind of data or notes, and just be kind to yourself. Okay, remember that this is a new skill for you. This is a new skill for your child. And if you take some notes and you're really graceful to yourself, you will make progress, right? You really just need to remember that being kind to yourself is going to be really important so that you can emotionally regulate while you're teaching this emotion regulation. So play is crucial for human development, but it's hard to incorporate to our already busy lives. It has nothing to do with IQ. Emotion regulation has nothing to do with IQ. Emotion regulation is vital for healthy development and social skills, and it can be taught through play once some play skills are built. Teaching emotion regulation needs to occur in scenarios that match real life difficulties, and these are more meaningful modes of practice than learning through things like flashcards or scene cards. And there's something we can do about it. Make it a real goal, like our other priorities. Find ways to track the goal if needed and place real value on play. And again, those simple steps to increase play are consistency, starting really small, using time limits and reinforcement, and taking notes. I always love to add this quote: autistic joy is the greatest act of resistance in a world that was not made for us. That's by Matt Lowry of the Autistic Culture podcast. And I'd like to thank the neurodiverse community. I'd like to thank Dr. Roger Joe for giving me the opportunity to do this series, for Spark at Yale, the largest autism research program ever, and for our autistic culture group, Casey Sparks, the Yale School of Medicine, and the Yale Child Study Center. So it's time for questions. I am going to just share that these are my upcoming talks. I have 4 left. Wow. In this 10-part series, we have October, November, December, and January of 2025. And again, if you have any questions about our previous talks or you want to get those recordings when they come out, just let me know.